from the OG Living Studios in sunny South Florida via Nashville, Tennessee. Heard all over the world on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your streaming content. It's the Nashville Hype with your host, Paul King.
Today I'm joined by hit songwriter Joe Doyle. He's had cuts by Reba McEntire, Tim McGraw, Jason Aldean, Alabama, and many, many others. It's a great conversation and you're really going to enjoy it. You came to Nashville in 1988 and you spent your songwriting career primarily in the 1990s. And it was a very different time in the 1990s. Nashville has changed a lot.
Oh, drastically, yeah. But I was active all through the 2000s, and I actually have a publishing deal now. I was downtown writing yesterday. If you count the late 80s when I got here, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 decades now for me.
That's incredible. That's amazing, really. To think, I was reading a little bit of your bio. You went to Berkeley College.
I did, yeah.
And then you won a couple of songwriting contests while there. And you thought, you know what, I guess I will move to Nashville and give this thing a try.
Yeah, I was there as a drummer, and there were so many talented drummers like Terry Lynn Carrington, who ended up on Arsenio Hall's house band, and Will Calhoun, who was in Living Color.
Yeah.
So I'd go down the hall or see them at one of the recital halls, and I can't play like that, So I started to write songs. I just, as soon as I picked up the guitar and piano, I was immediately writing. It wasn't like I went through the learning process of how to play the instrument other than for writing purposes. So I had 3 choices, obviously, New York, L.A., or Nashville. And my then girlfriend, now wife, we've been together, we met at school. She was from Knoxville originally. So it just kind of made more sense. Even then, Nashville was more of a songwriter's town than LA or New York. Mm-hmm. So it made sense, and it was a lot cheaper. I couldn't believe it when I got here. We've been living in downtown Boston, and we had this little one and closet sort of bedroom next to it. It was $800 a month, and that was in the mid 80s. When I got here,
oh wow,
I had a move-in special. It was $240 a month. And had a pool, it was an apartment complex. It was so much
amenities.
cheaper.
Yeah, you even had some amenities to fall back on.
Yeah, I was living on my tax return from the year before. I was a bartender at the Harvard Club while I was finishing up school at Berkeley. Mm-hmm. It was an easy transition, and I really kind of felt like Nashville was, I don't know, more my speed. I mean, I grew up in Rhode Island and then went to school in Boston, so I'd been in New England my whole life. But it just felt right, It's just the lifestyle. And fortunately, I got signed to BMG within the first 3 months I was here. I was just pretty diligent I went knocking on doors back when you could, up and down 16th, 17th Avenue.
That's why I was talking about the fact that Nashville has changed so much. I mean, you could knock on doors back in the day, and people would listen to your songs, and they would at least give you a shot, even if they didn't fulfill anything or come through in any way. It was a very open town back in the 90s, the late 80s, the early 90s. It seemed like anything was possible, and anybody could get a deal.
There were an awful lot of publishing companies, and there were an awful lot of record labels, and the labels all had satellite labels. Mm-hmm. And they all had artist rosters and A&R people, and that was a great time. Plus, I was young, and my wife ended up getting a job at Warner Records. So we would commute together when I would go downtown, and we'd have to go to the showcases in the evening as part of her job. So it was a real community. I knew everybody.
Right.
It was one of those towns where everybody knew each other because it hadn't been fragmented yet. I think Capitol. Jimmy Bowen was the first one who was running the label to move off of Music Row. He went over by Murphy Road.
Right.
I mean, I was like, whoa, what are they doing?
Jimmy Bowen, when he moved Capitol over off the row, that seemed like the beginning of the end in a way. Of the town being a town. It's really strange that you even mentioned that, because I had forgotten all about that episode. That was probably, when was that? That was 87 maybe? 80,
no, it was
later.
It was in the 90s. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it was the Garth. Yeah, it was when Garth was there. Okay.
Because Jimmy Bowen, when I first moved to town, he was running MCA Records.
Right.
when I got here in '88, and then he went. I used to Capitol after that.
Yeah. And Scott Hendricks, who I've been in the studio with Scott, Scott ended up taking over from Jimmy when Jimmy decided to retire. And I'm not sure who runs Capitol anymore, but yeah.
It's a guy that used to be at Arista Records. His name is escaping me.
Yeah.
He's been running it because I had a couple of Capitol. I had a Kenny Rogers on Capitol, not too well. I guess it's been 10 or 15 years ago now. And then I had a song on Luke Bryan's first album, which was Capitol. So
yeah,
I can't remember the feller's name, but
did I was going to ask you about the Luke Bryan cut. I read a story, and you're kind of this songwriter that likes to tell the story of the song, and it's really interesting. JoeDoyleSongs.com. You can read several of the stories behind the song, and also on your Facebook, by the way. And I may have read it on your Facebook that you were just put together with Luke Bryan in the early days of his career, possibly before he even had a record deal, and that's how that song came about.
It was. We were both at Murrah Music. I think I was there first, and then they signed Luke not long after that to a publishing and a production agreement. And so everybody there kind of wrote with each other. Mm-hmm. And so we had written that song, but we had another song that was the lead-off song on his artist demo package called "Small Town Favorite Son," which he never. There's a YouTube video of him playing it live. He used to play it in his live set all the time before he got his deal, and luckily he did record the tackle box on his first album, which I was thankful for.
Yeah. Have you kept up with him throughout his career, and have you pitched him a lot since then, or?
No, the last time I saw him was at a place called the Tin Roof over on DeMundrian, and I was in there with one of my former publishers, and all of a sudden he spies us, and he comes over, and he was talking on his phone, and he proceeded to sit down in my lap and motion to me, "I'll be off the phone in a minute." So that was the last time I saw him. It's funny though. Yesterday I was writing with a talented writer named Mike Mobley.
Oh yeah,
who actually who writes for Luke's company.
Oh, okay.
I haven't seen Luke in a long time. I'm thrilled for his tremendous success.
Yeah, it's been huge. His success over the years has been jarring in some way because he's never came off as being a huge star, but he is a huge star. It's kind of crazy in a way.
Well, it's funny to see him on stage with Lionel Richie because one day we were upstairs at Murrah and we were just playing each other's songs. I might have played a James Taylor song, and he sat down and he played Easy Like Sunday Morning. He actually got to be friends with the guy, So.
Yeah. You mentioned you're writing, and you wrote a song yesterday. First of all, how often do you do a demo, like a full demo on the songs that you write? Will you do a full demo on the one that you wrote yesterday? And how do you choose? What is the process of you choosing, or do you just turn it in and let the publishing company do that?
Well, I've always been the producer of my demos, and back, in the 90s and 2000s, the publishing companies had bigger budgets for it. So, you'd work with your publisher on which songs they wanted you to demo, so they'd have a bit of a say because they were fronting the money for them. Mm-hmm. And you kind of which ones are going to have a shot and which ones don't. So that was always, I'd pick, in the early days, I'd used to demo 5 at a time in a 3-hour session with the musicians, and then it got to the point where I just cut it back to 4 so we could spend a little more time. My songs are a little more complex than a lot of songs harmonically.
They are.
So
absolutely.
I wanted to take a little more time with them, but there's great players. They can play anything. But
in the 90s, it seemed like that you could almost do. You still had to do a demo, I guess, but you could almost do a work tape and it still make it to the producer, and the producer would know what to do with the song himself or herself, whoever was doing the producing. And then in the 2000s, it seemed that it was literally lick for lick. It just went from the full-blown demo into a recording session for the artist and the label, and it was lick for lick.
I would agree with that. A good stretch of the 90s, I had pared it down to acoustic guitar or piano and one accompaniment, whether it was steel guitar or if it was fiddle. Mm-hmm. And I'd do the vocals, and a buddy of mine would come in and do the backgrounds. And we got Joe Diffie cut from one of those little kind of glorified work tapes. Dan Seals cut a couple from those. So I had that for a little while, but you're right. It was when I went to Murrah Music in the 2000s. I guess I was at Acuff Rose late 90s. But it was that point where I started going back to doing the full demos and getting the best demo singers I could.
Right.
And so I stopped kind of singing most of my demos. Today, I'm in a unique situation as far as publishing. It was strictly our publisher would decide which ones we were going to demo. Mm-hmm. And which is fine by me. I don't hold the reins on my songwriting career as tightly as I once did. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's partly my age or it's just why get all bothered and caught up, just that's what they want to demo. Let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
So,
it's what they want to get behind. And if they're going to be behind it, then okay, knock yourself out. Right.
Yeah. It's so very hard to get outside songs recorded anymore. So it's really a long shot. And I think that's why a lot of the companies, they're really tight with their demo budgets.
Yeah.
30 years ago, go ahead, demo, throw a couple of weaker songs on it if it'll get you in the studio faster to demo those 2 or 3 that we really like.
Right.
But I think that's kind of unheard of these days.
How much does it cost now to do a demo of a songwriter? Like a songwriter's out here in Kalamazoo, Michigan and says, I want to get a demo of this song. Approximately, how much does it cost in Nashville now? I
would say anywhere from $600 to $1,000 per song, something like that, depending where you do it, who mixes it, what studio you use, how many musicians you use.
It doesn't seem like that's changed very much in that case because, even in the 90s and the 2000s in particular, it was around $600 to $1,000.
Yeah, the funniest part, though, is what demo singers used to get. When I first moved to town, I did hire Billy Dean, I hired Joe Diffie, I hired Joy White, and they were John Wesley Riles, who was a fantastic singer, and they were $40 for a song. Yeah. And nowadays, there's a couple of guys that are, really top notch, and they charge $250 just to do the vocal.
Oh, wow.
So most of them, I think, are about $150 to $200 for vocals, and then usually your mix is going to be a couple $100, and then whatever you end up spending on the studio and the engineer and the musicians when you track it, that's going to be the variables. But
it's such an investment.
It is. There's some couple of guys that I write with where they have a guy that does everything. He plays all the instruments, he engineers it, he mixes it. And they sound fantastic. And those can sometimes be a little closer to $500 for the song. Mm-hmm. And, if it's just a demo, if you're not trying to make a record, those things work really well. We've had a couple of covers, nothing big from those, but, they were good enough to get Michael Aldean recorded this young singer for a movie soundtrack. And Michael Aldean, of course, produced Christopher Cross's big record, and he played piano on Asia, the Steely Dan track. He's done. If you look up Michael Aldean, he's got credits forever. He was out in Los Angeles for a long time, but he's here now. But getting back to those demos, you can get those guys that do tracks and do it all for a little less than having to go in the big studio with the players. Yeah, but as you mentioned just a moment ago, it's harder than ever to actually get an outside cut. What is the way to get an inside cut? You have to write with the artist nowadays, or the artist? It used to be back in the day you had to choose. I mean, I can remember in the 90s you were either going to be a singer or an artist, or you're going to be a songwriter, and you kind of had to choose which one you're going to be. And now it's an amalgamation of everyone is either all of it, I guess. They're the complete package. And so is that the better way to get a cut nowadays, or what's your feeling on that? Oh, yeah. If you can get in the room with the artist or the producer, or if you write for the artist's publishing company, you're going to have a much better shot at getting on a record. I remember watching it sort of unfold, just the scenario you were talking about, where the label would sign. That's how Red Akins and I had the hit She Said Yes together. He was a development artist at Warner Brothers, He ended up on Decca, but he was there first. And what his A&R person would do was, hey, set him up with writers that had a little bit of success. I'd had a couple of records by that point. And so that's how they would do it. Whether or not, now Rhett was a talented songwriter even from the beginning, and he's gone on to have a tremendous career as a writer. But, there were writers that I was put in a room with that were like artist writers where they really shouldn't have. They should have been at a vocal lesson instead of wasting time in a writing room. But right. I don't mean that uglier at all. I just
naturally, that's the way it was. And so you talk about Rhett. Can you call these people up and be like, hey, Rhett, I've got an open availability. Let's try to do one.
I've never been one to chase it, probably much to my detriment. I haven't seen Rhett in quite some time. We were scheduled to write years ago, and he was going on a hunting trip, so he called me and said, hey man, I can't show up, and that was kind of, he had a lull in his career for a little bit, and then all of a sudden he just took off as a writer. It was about the mid-2000s, I think, when that happened again for him. And then his son, of course, I remember his son Thomas, Rhett was pulling out of the Warner Brothers parking lot. I was going to pick up my wife who worked there, and he stopped and he said, hey, this is my boy in the back, and he was probably 5 or 6 years old at the time, and he's gone on to have quite a career too.
I have so many of his songs. It seems like I play on the Nashville Hype radio station. Yeah, he's definitely having a career right now. Have you thought to yourself, I would have done this different had I known, or are you completely satisfied with how things have kind of turned out?
Oh, there's certainly things I would have done differently. But also have the feeling of the latter statement you said. I can't complain. I think if there were a few things I did differently, maybe by being more aggressive. I just kind of, when I came up, it was the guys like Johnny McRae that wrote Love to Lay You Down and Better Off in a Pine Box, and all that generation of writers is what I learned from. And their whole philosophy was, there was a pride in getting on a record that didn't have any political connection. That was almost like, if it was lost its validity if it was like an inside situation to some degree. And so that was my approach to it. I wanted my music to speak for itself. I didn't like pitching my songs. I liked other people to do that.
I was going to ask you about that as well. Yeah, it also turned from the 90s, Nashville, from the 90s into the 2000s. There was a time when song pluggers would go out and really work hard for the songwriters, and somewhere along the way, it became the songwriter needed to get the cut themselves. And we'll do the administration part, and we'll help you with the demo, and maybe we'll front you some money. But if you're going to get the cut, you really have to go and work it. I
agree with that. I was fortunate. I had a friend, and it really backed my career all the way through. His name is Dan Hodges, and he came in and interned in the tape copy room at BMG when he was finishing up college. And we became fast friends. And when he moved on, he was working for Rick Hall at Fame and took me down there, and Rick offered me $50,000 a year to write for him and cut a record on me. And I didn't. This goes back to your earlier question. I didn't take it. I stayed at BMG for a little longer. And in retrospect, I probably should have taken that opportunity when I did. I left BMG in 98. I'd been there 10 years. And I think in some ways that probably wasn't the best move. But I went somewhere else, and it had to do with contractual recoupment issues. They wanted to recoup a back catalog that was already in the black and cross-collateralize with my new advances, and I didn't want to do it. But in retrospect, leaving BMG, and I went to Tom Collins' publishing company, who Tom produced Ronnie Millsap and Barbara Mandrell. But unfortunately, by the time I got there in the late 90s, his production career had kind of waned.
Yeah.
And within 8 months, our boxes and ourselves were packed up and headed over to Acuff Rose. He sold the company. We were an acquisition. And then that company got sold to Sony Tree. And so that's when I went over to Murrah. But I can't remember what your original question was.
The consolidation began in publishing. People started to really sell catalogs left and right, and it still happens to a certain extent today. But back in those days, it was crazy because you would like to even hear or think about A Cup Rose going into a corporate kind of business it just seems impossible. And it goes back to when like you said, when Capitol moved off Row and the Row started to consolidate and the publishing companies. It's crazy how that has changed. Now, you had a really huge song with In Picture.
Yeah, I lucked out on that one.
Tell us the story of how you lucked out, in your words. I
was back home, and my sister, who was one of my dearest friends, I would always stay with her when I'd go back home. And she had a couple of little kids, Brendan and Bridget. And when I was up there, I was thinking, man, if these were my kids and I only got to see them periodically, it would be a really sad situation. Mm-hmm. And I remember something that my song plugger said. I went into Bobby Boyd's office one day, and I looked on his mantle. He had a picture of his boy that lived in Texas. Mm-hmm. And I said, boy, that kid's getting big. He said, yeah, I'm watching him growing pictures. And I didn't say anything to him. I just kind of went, to myself. And when I got back from that trip back home, I sat at the piano in the old house. We lived in Kingston Springs back then. And luckily, my mother-in-law gave us a baby grand, so it was in this little converted garage. But I sat down and the chorus just fell out. And I thought to myself, hey, that's a pretty good verse. And I had no idea that I had just written the chorus. So,
right.
So I went in and asked Bobby, I said, hey, you don't mind if I use that title you said to me just inadvertently? And he said, no. So I ended up giving him a third of it and kept 2/3 of the song. But
okay, I was wondering about that because he's also had some really big hits otherwise, Bobby.
Yeah, his forte is titles. So that the thing he had on Rascal Flatts, Marcus Hummon and Jeff Hanna, I believe, from the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, mm-hmm. got the lion's share of that, and he got a percentage like he did. Okay,
Bless the Broken Road, right? Is that the one you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah. Marcus Hummon, fantastic songwriter,
absolutely,
and so Jeff Hanna. So, but Bobby was really good with clever hooks, and he would oftentimes, purposefully give them to writers at BMG. Mm-hmm. And there was another one he had, I think, Working Man's PhD. He gave
the Aaron Tippin.
Yeah, he gave the title to, I want to say Philip, can't remember his last name, but he was one of the writers there. So that's what Bobby kind of did. Now, Bobby's a talented writer too, because he's continued to do that through the years. But that was my experience on the Pictures. But how it got to Alabama was interesting. It was on hold for everybody. Doug Johnson, who was A&R rep at one of the labels back, I can't remember which one. He had heard some of my guitar vocal demos and wanted me to come and play for him. So my plugger brought me over. I brought my guitar and I sang him some songs, and one of them was In Pictures, and he put it on hold for, I think it was Doug Stone and then Colin Ray, but it kept falling off hold. Mm-hmm. Finally, John Guess, who was one of the main master engineers throughout the 90s, he was producing Linda Davis for Arista Records. Mm-hmm. Tim Dubois had signed her. And I think it was Chip Young, who was a legendary guitar player and one of my best buds. He was one of our song pluggers. He played it for Linda at the office one day, so they recorded it. And the story goes that Alabama was riding through the mountains of Georgia listening to her album, and they heard it and decided they wanted to cut it, and they did. And I remember getting the call that hey, Alabama's going to cut it. Fantastic. So, and then they had this 15 years in the record business or party down at the Union Station in the big ballroom, and at the end of the little presentation, they said, okay, anybody who's ever had an Alabama recording, come down here in the middle. So I went down, and Teddy Gentry, he looked at me and he said, hey, you're up next.
Oh, wow.
We had the next single, and I didn't think it was going to do very well because it was a ballad. I think the first week it entered Billboard chart at like 38, like just the first week of its sent. Maybe this is going to happen, and it shot up really fast. And the beautiful thing about it, besides the monetary benefit, was the stories I've heard through the years from folks about how they reached out to their father, or father reached out to their child after hearing that, or some guy who came up to me after I played one night and he said, I always said I was going to punch the guy that wrote that song, made me cry. So it was one of those deals where it was, you made a difference, hopefully. And an interesting thing is sometimes if I'm really bored, I'll get on YouTube and look up videos of it where people have uploaded their pictures or whatever and use the music, is to read the comments down. And some of them are just like sad, really, really sad. This was my story, and we still haven't spoken in 25 years. Man, so I think I hit a nerve with that song. And the last thing I'll say about it was my dad sent me a newspaper clipping from the Tampa area, and I still have it. And it was a judge who was a divorce judge who would make the man granting divorce listen to that song before he'd grant the divorce. And I was like,
wow.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah.
I've never heard of something like that.
I've got it, the clipping to this day. I've got a little package of different things through the years. But
yeah, that's crazy. How high did that song actually chart?
It was a number one. So
it did go to number one. Okay.
The beauty of it is that they've repackaged. RCA was fantastic. The 41 number ones, it was on there. It was on Love Songs package. It was on the Essential. It was on the Super Hits. It was so that was like a real gold mine for a good period of time.
Yeah. You said on your website, and I don't know if this is still accurate, but you have been on albums. Your songs have been on albums that have sold 17 million copies. Is it more now, or is it still around 17 million?
I think it's still there because nobody buys records anymore. It's all streaming royalties now.
That's why I wanted to say this and it was a question that I had planned, and I don't really plan these shows. I just get on here and talk for the audience to know. I'm not really planning this out, but I did see that you had 17 million album sales for the songs and things, and it's amazing to me because nowadays it's all streaming and nobody buys records. Reese Palmer, who's been on the show, she said nobody's buying records. Jeff McCool, he's been on the show. Nobody's buying records. Like there was and I can't think of the name of the band. They sing the song Cruise, but they just broke up.
Is that Florida Georgia Line?
Yeah, Florida Georgia Line. Thank you, Joe. They just broke up a few weeks ago, and I was reading their biography, and they sold over a 10-year career 5 million records. Now they have billion in streams, but they only sold over a 10-year career 5 million records. And I was talking to Jeff McCool about this, and I said, you would think a career like that, you would have Garth Brooks level sales, but it didn't happen.
No. Well, everybody was. I remember one of my older sisters, she'd go to the record store and buy like 6 or 7 CDs at a time. When I was a kid, I'd save my paper route money and ride the bus down into Providence and go to the Strawberry record store and get that one album I've been wanting. And I missed that. Another thing is the royalties. When I get my statements from different catalogs, it's the paperwork is huge, but the money is minuscule. Like because all the streaming is like 0.000, and then you finally get an actual digit after that decimal point of a penny. Yeah. So I would have, like, for instance, that back in the cigarette that was Jason Aldean cut.
Great song, by the way. Great song.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was about 1,200,000 spins in a particular quarter. Mm-hmm. And I had half writer and a third of the publishing share too, and I'd only make $28 from those 1,200,000 streams.
I left a comment on an artist one time, some artist on Twitter, and I can't recall who it was, but they were like, "Thank you so much for 300 million spins." And my comment back was, "You made $30," and congratulations. Yeah, because it really has changed and transformed the entire industry from the top down. And songwriters are really suffering. I had Amanda Colleen Williams on. And she was talking about this, where it's transformed the entire industry and has really hurt the songwriters more than really anybody, I guess. Would you think that's accurate?
I would agree with that, yes. The artist royalties are a little better with streaming. But yeah, the writers and publishers, is such a small amount. That's why most of them have closed up their doors. Mm-hmm. I think there was a quote I heard somewhere that there's only 20% of the writers, professional songwriters in Nashville than there was 15 years ago. It's down 80%.
That's crazy. It's just another way that the music industry in Nashville in particular has changed.
Yeah, it was never easy. Even when it was hard when it was easy, somebody once said about it. Because there were a lot of writers, and when I was coming up, like one of the first big records I was on was Reba McEntire's From Our Broken Heart album.
And you've got the song Buying Her Roses on there. And it's a great song. It's a great, great song. And one of the things that I really love about that song is it doesn't offer a resolution. You were talking about how your songs and melodies and things of that nature are kind of complicated, and they are, because I've listened to a lot of your music. But the one thing that I love about that song is there is no resolution.
That was a true story, and I've got the story behind that song. It was a kind of a sordid story that initiated me writing it. But the funny thing about that song is I was sitting at the front desk, Sharon at BMG. We were just a little house with like 5 writers at this point. They hadn't started buying all the different catalogs, and it grew into a big entity. But I was sitting there, and she said, "Hey, Opie, will you?" Because that was my nickname. They call me Opie, and everybody around town knew me as Opie, which was interesting. But I was sitting there, and I started thinking about this guy that I knew who was having an affair with the bartender at this local watering hole, and he was married. And one day I walked into that place, the bar. That's where Harlan Howard would hang out.
Oh yeah,
Richard Lee and Peter and Bob Beckham, who started Combine, who signed Christopherson and Dolly. And so luckily my publisher Henry Hurt really took me under his wing. So that's where he would go. He did these things called the tour, he'd call it. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, in order to meet and introduce writers to different people, he would, support our beer tab. So I went in there one day, and there was this big dozen roses behind the bar. And everybody kind of was, I don't know, was aware of what was going on with my friend and that bartender. And so I just started thinking, boy, there's a song in there. So I was sitting at the front desk at BMG and had this old cheap Yamaha guitar that I'd bought up in Providence when I was 18, I guess. And the action was really high on it. So for some reason I was playing in the key of C, which was really high for me. Mm-hmm. If I was to sing it now, I'd do it down in A, minor third down. But I was sitting there and I just went, "He's out buying her roses." And then I went to play the F chord, which is the first bar chord. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get one of my fingers down in time, and I ended up hitting that 4 minor chord.
Oh, wow.
And
yeah.
My ears just went, "Oh, my goodness." And I think that was probably the reason that song got recorded, was because that chord. And I've heard Neil Sedaka, I guess, he calls them money chords. If they're put in the right place,
yeah, they
can have such impact. And I think that was a big part of why that song was recorded. Now, my buddy Rick Peoples, he's about 16 years older, so he was kind enough to write with me. I was just a kid in my 20s, and he wrote a lot of that lyric. I wrote all the music, and I had the first part of the chorus, and then he was one of those writers, lyric writers, who would just like take him 10 minutes and it was done, so he had a major part of the lyric on that song.
Yeah.
But like I said, I wrote all the music for it. And
it's funny that you mentioned the bar tab thing. I used to hang out with Harlan. It seemed like all the time. I would see him at least every Wednesday at the Sunset Grill, and we would sit and have a couple of drinks and things of that nature. That's how I met several of the co-writers that I've gotten to write with, is the bar tour, I guess, is the best way to say it. And it's also part of the reason that I knew I needed to leave Nashville, because I wasn't sure that was the lifestyle that I actually wanted to live, let's say, because back then it was like really hard drinking. It was some heavy drinking. I met Glenn Sutton. I don't know if you remember Glenn Sutton.
I remember the name. I don't know if I knew him, but I know the name.
Yeah, he's a Songwriter Hall of Fame. He Grammy Song of the Year and all of that. And I met him also at the Sunset Grill, and ended up going over to his house, and we ended up writing, I would assume, the last song he ever wrote, because he had been retired for 1,000 years at that point. But he was like, why don't you play me one of your songs? Okay, and I started playing, and he was like, no, do it like this. No, write it like this. Okay, let's add this line here. And, it's amazing that's how open Nashville was, I guess, at the time. Sales could make you a living. What do you think happens now going forward with people that really want to be a songwriter, really want to get a publishing deal or something of that nature?
That's a tough one. If you're not an artist, it's really important to get connected with a developing artist that has potential, because that's going to be really the only way you're going to be able to make a living is if you get in that camp. You get write a lot of songs with that artist, and then they get a record deal. There's hardly any publishing deals to be had anymore, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've heard from a lot of people is that how you can get one is if you already have something in the pipeline, but then they want you to bring that song in.
But
so
the question is, that brings the question of how do you get in? Because the doors, do you go in nowadays with an attorney first, or do you go in with a manager first? Because the doors seem to be completely closed.
I don't know, because from about 2013 to 2018, I was not published. I was doing my own thing after the last publishing deal I had. And then in 2018, a friend of mine was at a company, and they have a wealthy backer, and he's been backing this company since the early 80s.
Oh, wow.
And he said, Johnny's looking to sign one more writer. So I gave him a link to some songs and a little bit of the bio. So I ended up signing there in 2018, and that's where I've been.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes think I'm a tax write-off, but that doesn't bother me any.
Right.
I still enjoy the process of writing. When you get a good one, like I had fun yesterday writing with Mike, that we wrote that Back in the Cigarette together, and we hadn't written in a number of years, and it was fun to catch up. We talked about old times. Started one yesterday. We didn't finish it, but something it was interesting because I woke up from a dream. This has never happened to me. I've read this about yesterday about McCartney, and it came to me in a dream or blah,
right.
blah, blah. I literally woke up the night before last in the middle of the night, and in the dream I was writing a song, and for some reason when I got up, I said, I got to remember what that was about. And it just, the title popped in my head, Whiskey Bits and Pieces.
And you did remember it.
I did.
Whiskey Bits and Pieces.
Yeah, A Night to Remember is coming back to me in Whiskey Bits and Pieces. It's that little fog, when you wake up, a big night. But here's another thing about writing, is the most obvious way to do that is this guy is heartbroken and he's drinking too much to get over something. I said, why don't we do it this way, where he met the woman of his dreams the night before, and he's going, and he's,
oh yeah,
it's like, I remember Dance, I remember a Last Call Kiss, I remember her walking through the door, I remember sitting down. So let's put a positive spin on this.
Yeah,
there's so many negative songs, and those are almost impossible to get recorded anymore. So
how much does faith play in what you do? A number of your songs mention something of faith, and so I was just curious about that.
That's a good question. Well, I grew up Catholic, so I had to go to church every Sunday. I went to Catholic high school. Luckily, it was co-ed. It wasn't all boys at that point. So I don't know what this. And my folks were very religious. Mm-hmm. There was Catholic, so it wasn't a lot of during the week, other than just like the golden rule to me is important. I don't know why it pops up. Like, for instance, Thank the Good Lord Jesus when is in the chorus of Tackle Box.
Yeah, the Tackle Box. Yeah.
I have a song called 23rd Psalm.
That's a great song.
Thank you. That's been recorded by 7 or 8 different artists now, and still not a hit.
Brett Eldridge, his attack of that song I thought was great.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He used to come out and sing demos here at the house, and he's a pretty tall feller. So our one mic stand, we had to put it up on like a box fan on its side so it would be up tall. But he was a great singer. He sang maybe, I don't know, six or 7 demos before he got his record deal.
When I hear that song, I know we're talking about faith at the moment, but I hear it and I hear other artists singing it, if that makes any sense.
I hope that comes true again. Yeah.
But back to Faith, it just kind of ingrains itself. And I've had this conversation with others, but in the music industry, it just seems like, especially in the country music industry, it just seems like once you have faith interjected, it does help. And I don't know where it comes from, but I want to say it's Hank Williams when he wrote "I Saw the Light."
I think gospel music certainly found its way into country music. I don't really know. You're talking about lyrical elements, right?
Yeah, a little bit, yes.
Yeah. I think, country music, if you think about it, I just read the Louvin Brothers biography, which was quite fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And Religion, they were a gospel duo before they went country.
Yes, I know.
So I think it's sort of a tradition in country music. I don't know. I don't really think about let me put some faith here, or it just if it calls for it in a particular spot in a song, then I'm not afraid of doing. I'm not. Well, I've always been sort of more of a moralistic songwriter. Like I want some morals in my song. So I'm a little hesitant to put something a little risque here and there. It's just not, I don't know. I guess I didn't want to offend my mother when she was still with us. So
it's funny. I sat down with Eddie Raven this is when I was growing up, a kid, before I ever thought about becoming a songwriter or whatever, or doing anything in music. And he had an entire box of songs that had been pitched to him on tape. And we sat one night and just for hours listened to these tapes. And these were some really big hit songs that he turned down. Like every once in a while, a song would come up oh my goodness, that's a big song, and you turned it down. And one of them was "Achy Breaky Heart." That he turned it down, and the reason he turned it down is he didn't like the heart blowing up. Like the imagery of that. And I thought, wow, that's, and it's a lesson that I've carried with me ever since, that, sometimes you can have the perfect song, but one line can mean everything. And I love what you just said, because, you got to think about the imagery, and you don't want to offend your mom. And
that brought to mind in pictures, I ended up changing the bridge because I can't remember, it was Mary Martin maybe, who was an A&R person at CBS or whatever label, and she didn't like one line in the bridge, so I ended up rewriting the bridge because of that one line. I think it was sort of made the guy in the song not look good or something. I can't remember what the original line was, but I ended up rewriting that bridge.
Do you write specifically with an artist in mind?
Never have.
Never have.
No, I just kind of write what I like, what I enjoy, what I think is good. And I was telling the story to my buddy Bobby Fischer, who's a famous songwriter.
Oh yeah.
Yesterday, he was sitting at the office, and Michael Peterson reached out to me. Michael was on Warner Brothers, had Cheat, Swear, Steal, and Lie, I think was a big hit for him.
Yeah.
I knew him from back in the day, and he recorded a song of mine that Daryl Dodd had recorded, but his version never was released. I think when he left Warner Brothers, he went to Sony, I think, and they never did put out the album. And so I posted something on Facebook, because that has happened to me a number of times. Like Martina McBride was probably the biggest one that was recorded and not released, and I never did get to hear it. But Michael was one. So he reached out to me. We talked. He lives in Vegas now, and he started telling me about what his projects were that he had going. He's doing a Brazilian country record with a famous Brazilian country producer down there. And then he's doing a standards kind of project called My Standards, more Tin Pan Alley stuff. And then he said, I'm looking for some aggressive kind of like John Hyatt music. And so the more I got to think about it, I said, I don't really have things like any of those three projects, because I kind of do a certain thing,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll write up tempo, or I'll write ballads or mid tempos, but it's kind of my style, my thing. So I've never been one of those really chameleon types who can let's write for this artist, because I think that was your original question.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
do you hear an artist when the song is finished, let's say? Do you hear an artist, or do you not hear an artist?
Not Not really.
Okay. That's so interesting to me, because typically when I write a song and I say, this is a Kenny Chesney song. And I'll give you an example. Kenny was on another radio show, and he just happened to mention this. He was telling a story, and in that story, he said something that was interesting to me, or at least my brain went bing, and I thought, I got to write that. The thing is, I've done that with Kenny. I did it with Reba, and I've done it with Darius Rucker. Like I have a Darius Rucker song that I hear for Darius. It's silly, I guess. I don't know, but we're so opposite in that way. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's just the way I write. If I can sing it, sometimes I'll write things that are a little bit out of my vocal range, or as far as some high notes, but I know that that's the right melody to be there, and I'll get somebody, like a Brad Eldridge we used to sing, or Joe Diffie, or they had or there was a guy named Jason Sellers. I don't know if you ever knew Jason.
I know the name. The name is familiar.
There were songs that I would write that were not within my sort of wheelhouse. To me, it's more like maybe a lyric might be more something that somebody might gravitate to, that I would think of, and then we'd pitch it to that person because it might be something they would do. They
would get into. How do you get your co-writers? I mean, do you enjoy your co-writing process, or do you write solely and enjoy that more?
I enjoy co-writing more. I find solo writing boring and not near as much fun, because half of the co-writes for me is we talk, and I don't like, hey, nice to meet you, let's write a song. You have to do that at some points in your career, but I prefer to write with someone that I know well, that I, I remember writing with Peter McCann, let's say, who wrote Right Time of the Night back when I was a kid, when I first got here, and just so afraid to say something stupid as a lyric. Well, should I mention that, or is that going to sound like a dumb idea?
Right.
But with a friend who you're comfortable with, to me, those are the more fun, for instance. But there's some songs that I wrote with some folks that I just met them. That was our first time meeting, like our publisher set us up or something. And sometimes those are great songs because you were forced to really have to show up,
right, bring
something to the table. So but preferably I like to co-write with a small group of friends that I have relationships with outside of writing appointments, so it's just a lot more fun.
And with a 40-year career, is there anyone...
34 years.
34 years. That's just amazing. Is there anyone that you wanted to write with but never had a chance?
What do you mean, besides Paul McCartney and Sting? Not really. Yeah. I really got to write with so many different writers.
What is your catalog, by the way? I forgot to ask that. How many songs in your catalog?
I would say 1,000, somewhere around 1,000. Because you had a quota, so you had to write so many a year, and if I just multiply that, it comes out to somewhere close to 1,000 songs. There's some real, some that I wouldn't play for anybody in there, especially the early years.
That's what I was telling Amanda in her podcast. I was telling her, I was like, I've got 400 songs, and about 4 of those are good. And she just laughed because, it's subjective, I guess. But yeah, you wouldn't want to play every song that you have. You don't end a session, let's say a songwriting session, and walk out going, this is a hit. Do you do that every time, or do you go, that's kind of a stinker or a half and half?
I've never been one of those. I wrote a hit today. I've never been one of those type of people. For instance, when Mikey and I wrote Back in the Cigarette, at the end of the session, I think it was two times together. So the second day we finished it, and my wife was flying back from somewhere, so I was going to pick her up at the airport after my co-write, and he put it down. I was listening to the CD of the little work tape we had done, And when she got in the car, I said, I think we got one today. I think we got a good one. So to me, that is like as far as I go in bragging on anything I write. I've always been just sort of, well, yeah, I think this is a good one. But, I've never been, this is a smash. This is it. Sometimes, you finish something up just to finish it. I try not to do that anymore because I don't have quota with my current publishing deal, which is so strange.
Wow.
But I wrote a lot of songs in the last 4 years. I would say, 125, 150 songs in the last 4 years.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But without quota, we 3 days a week I would write. And then the other days of the week, like I do a lot of bicycle riding. So there's a country road I ride about 15 miles, and I've written like choruses and whole verses while on the bike ride that I didn't have an appointment that day. And then I'd go in the next day if I had a co-write, say, hey, I think I got the second verse, and we may have to go back and edit some things. But so it's almost like you're always thinking about it, the ideas, or I play piano and guitar every day, whether I'm writing or not. It's like I woke up this morning about 6 o'clock and just started playing keyboard for a while, playing, I don't know, Somewhere Over the Rainbow or some of my songs, or Yesterday, or whatever, just to, expand my horizons as far as chord changes. And
once you put a song away, like once you finish a song and put it away, and it's been a year, can you do you have the ability to just pick that song right back up, like, and know it?
If it was a good one, I used to play a lot of shows. When I say a lot, like maybe 20, 24, 25 a year for a stretch of time there. I haven't since COVID, and so there was like 20 song kind of repertoire that I would regularly run through. So if it's one that I know well, I can remember it. But there's, for instance, like that Buying Her Roses. I sometimes will play that on piano, and after I sing the chorus, I don't do the verse because I don't remember all the verses stuff, but I know the chorus. I'll play it, and all of a sudden I'll go into the bridge of a Joe Diffie cover I had called "Never Mind to Lose," and then sing that chorus, and it's just. So I remember bits and pieces of things.
And that's why you're writing a song called Bits and Pieces.
There you go. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, it's just funny. The ones I do, of course, I remember in pictures because I played it 100 times and or more than that. And She Said Yes, I play. And there's just some that I enjoy playing and singing, so they've really stayed in my conscious mind. So I know them. But I'll look at a title. If I look at an old DAT tape, for instance, or early CD, I don't remember what that was about or how it goes. Or it was funny. I was looking through my DATs one time, and I was looking for Stephanie Bentley's version of In Pictures because she did a piano vocal for us, and that's what Linda heard was the piano vocal I had her do. And I was listening to a couple of songs after that she had done for us that I'd written with Lang Martin, and Lang wrote The Greatest Man I Never Knew, which was on that album.
Yeah.
And he wrote Rub It In, the old Billy Crash Craddock. And so he and I had written some songs 30 years ago, and one of them was called In Spite of Love. And I listened to it, I said, boy, that was good. I forgot about that one, and then something else would come on that wasn't so good. And I go, oh boy, what was I thinking when I wrote that one? I guess I was thinking, you have a quota. So if you want to keep getting your advances, make sure you fulfill your quota.
Yeah, make sure you put in the work. Is there anything that you would like to mention while we're talking?
I would encourage anybody to go to my webpage. There's a link to a Reverb Nation page where you can listen to a lot of the demos, which you might find interesting. If you know the record, you'll get to hear what the demo sounded like. That's about all I can think of is I've got a joedoylesongs.com. And that will get you to a Reverb Nation link. And if anybody's interested, I do have a couple of CDs that if anybody still buys CDs, you can order on that website. And they have songs that, for instance, that Kenny Rogers has recorded, Alabama, Rhett Akins, Tim McGraw, Jason Aldean. So these are my versions of them. So if you know those songs, you might find it interesting to own my versions.
Are you going on tour? You mentioned that you haven't played a show in a while. Maybe not a tour, but are you going to start playing live again?
I do have one show that I know I have to play. Thankfully, I was inducted into the Rhode Island Music Hall of Fame back in 2020, but that was right when COVID hit, so they postponed the ceremony. And so I know that's the one show I'm going to do again is when they actually do it, because I'll get to go back home and see a lot of friends and family, and I will certainly perform then.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being on the Nashville Hype.
Oh, I enjoyed it. It was great talking to you.